Do you know how a city's name became shorthand for the end of a war? This is the story of Stalingrad, a battle of rubble, radiostatic, and stubborn courage that turned the tide of World War II. It began as a strategic objective and became something far more, a test of will between two dictators and a crucible that revealed the limits of military ambition. In the summer of 1942, Hitler turned his gaze to the Eastern Front. Stalingrad sat on the Volga River, a transport hub, an industrial center, and, to Stalin, a city that bore his own name. For both leaders, taking or holding Stalingrad would be symbolic for the men on the ground. It would be a fight for survival. German forces swept into the southern Soviet Union in 1942 with an offensive that mixed speed and force, driven by the promise of oil fields to the south. By late August, their armored columns and infantry reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. The Luftwaffe bombed them. City in waves, the skyline changed from factories and apartment blocks to a choking, ash-gray ruin. But buildings don't defend themselves. People do. Soldiers and civilians turn the wreckage into a new kind of battlefield. Urban warfare warped conventional tactics. Blitzkrieg had worked across open plains, but in the ruins of Stalingrad, every street, factory, and cellar was its own defensive position. Close-quarter fighting replaced maneuver warfare, machine guns and windows, snipers on rooftops, grenades tossed through shattered doorways. Pace and geography mattered less than persistence and improvisation, the city's factories. Tractor works, grain elevators, and even a flour mill became fortresses. Hold at all costs was more than an order. It became a way of life. On the Soviet side, marshals and ordinary soldiers improvised brilliantly. The city's defenders included regular Red Army units, hastily mobilized workers, militia, and Order No. 227's ideology of not a step back. Famous stories emerged. Pavlov's house, a seemingly ordinary apartment block that a small garrison defended heroically against repeated assaults, became a symbol of local resistance. On the surrounding heights, Mamayev Kurgan changed hands dozens of times. It was bloodied but never decisively abandoned. Such places became anchors in a chaotic, minute-by-minute battle. On the German side, the capture of Stalingrad was intended to secure the Volga and protect the flank of the southern offensive. General Friedrich Paulus and the 6th Army pushed through, street by street, buying ground with gains measured in houses and blocks. Not kilometers, but as autumn wore on, the German advance stalled. Reinforcements were thin, supply lines stretched painfully long, and winter loomed. The urban environment favored defenders. And the Soviets learned to combine local counterattacks with cunning logistics. Then the Soviets did something audacious. On November 19, 1942, they launched Operation Uranus, a massive, coordinated counteroffensive designed not to retake the city directly, but to encircle the German forces fighting within it. The planners targeted the weaker Romanian and Italian units guarding the German flanks, Soviet. Armor and infantry punched through these lines, exploited gaps, and met behind Stalingrad, sealing a ring of steel. What had once been a German offense now became an encirclement, a cauldron trapping the 6th Army and other Axis units in a shrinking perimeter. Encirclement changed the nature of the fight completely. The trapped forces were not simply besieged, they faced dwindling food, fuel, ammunition, and the brutal Russian winter. Hitler forbade a breakout. Instead, he promised relief and ordered Paulus to hold his ground, while insisting that the Luftwaffe supplied the 6th Army by air. The result was a logistical fantasy. Airlift attempts could not deliver the tonnage required to sustain an army in combat. Weather, Soviet anti-aircraft fire, and the sheer distance made each crate of supplies a small victory and a tragic drop in the bucket. Within the pocket, the fighting became epic in human terms. Streets that had seen the first skirmishes now hosted desperate brawls for every stairwell, every cellar, every quarter. Units fought without sleep, with boots threadbare and rations scant. Temperatures plunged, and frostbite joined wounds as killers. Commanders improvised defenses. Engineers created makeshift fortifications. Medics worked miracles with meager supplies. On the Soviet side, Stalin ordered no mercy. The city that bore his name must be held. And the siege became part of a larger narrative of national survival. Meanwhile, the Soviets tightened their grip outside. They prepared Operation Ring to reduce the pocket systematically, methodically squeezing the trapped forces. By January 1943, the noose tightened to a few kilometers of frozen hell. Paulus wrote desperate appeals. German relief efforts, including Field Marshal Manstein's attempt to punch through with Operation and Winter Storm, fell short. Cold, hunger, and attrition did their work as much as bullets and shells did. On February 2, 1943, Friedrich Paulus surrendered. Nearly 91,000 Axis troops were taken, including tens of thousands who were sick or wounded. It was the largest single surrender of Axis forces to date. The human cost was devastating. Estimates vary, but hundreds of thousands of soldiers died, and civilian casualties were catastrophic. The city itself lay in ruins, yet out of that ruin, an unmistakable strategic fact emerged. Stalingrad marked the end of German strategic initiative on the Eastern Front. From that point forward, the Red Army would press westward, regaining territory and momentum until Berlin itself fell in 1945. The battle's significance runs deeper than statistics. It exposed the limits of ideological hubris and logistical overreach. Hitler's insistence on holding ground at any cost, his refusal to permit a tactical withdrawal, and the over-reliance on air transport for resupply showed how political imperatives can cripple military judgment. On the Soviet side, the victory showcased tenacity, ruthless planning, and the capacity to integrate intelligence, deception, and massed armor into a decisive counteroffensive. Stalingrad also left an enduring moral imprint. The brutality of urban combat produced atrocities and suffering. Partisan activity and reprisals blurred lines between combatant and civilian. Liberation revealed mass graves, hunger-stricken survivors, and the full horror of the Nazi occupation across the East. In the post-war era, Stalingrad became a foundational story in Soviet memory, a tale of sacrifice and triumph used to legitimize the state's wartime narrative for Western analysts. It provided a stark lesson in the interplay of logistics, morale, and strategy. The battle reshaped military doctrine too. Urban warfare's complexity combined arms in constrained spaces, the importance of intel, and small unit initiative, and the lethal interplay of armor, infantry, and artillery influenced training and planning for decades. Military planners learned that seizing a city is not merely a function of firepower. It is a test of supply lines, command flexibility, and human resilience. Finally, Stalingrad is a human story as much as a military one. Soldiers on both sides endured conditions that would break ordinary people: hunger, cold, fear, and the daily calculus of survival. Civilians who stayed or were trapped suffered terrors that defy easy recounting. Yet, even within that darkness, acts of courage, mutual aid, and stubborn defiance emerged. Neighbors sharing rations, soldiers saving comrades at cost to their own safety, medics keeping hope alive against staggering odds. When we remember Stalingrad, we remember more than a battle plan. We remember choices. Choices by leaders about strategy and sacrifice. Choices by soldiers about duty and survival. Choices by civilians about whether to flee or stay. And we remember the lesson that no war is won by symbols alone. Logistics, humility, and respect for human limits often matter more than nationalist slogans. Stalingrad stands as a warning and as an emblem, a warning about the costs of hubris and a testament to the capacity of people to endure, resist, and, sometimes, to turn the course of history. If you like, I can convert this into a 100-scene CapCut-ready script, shorten it into a 2-minute short, or produce suggested visuals and archival clips to match each paragraph. Which would you like next?